Our New Testament reading and preaching text comes from Luke chapter 20, verses 20 through 26. If you'd like to follow along in the Pew Bible, that's on New Testament page 84. Luke 20, 20 through 26. So they watched him and sent spies who pretended to be honest in order to trap him by what he said, so as to hand him over to the jurisdiction and authority of the governor. So they asked him, "Teacher, we know that you are right in what you say and teach, and you show deference to no one, but teach the way of God in accordance with truth. Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But he perceived their craftiness and said to them, "Show me a denarius. Whose head and whose title does it bear?" They said, "The emperor's." He said to them, "Then give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." And they were not able in the presence of the people to trap him by what he said. And being amazed by his answer, they became silent. This is the word of the Lord. So everything is on the line with this conversation. They've absolutely got him. The chief priests and the scribes were not able to outthink Jesus when they had interactions with him, so they retreated, they regrouped, and they came up with a plot to trap Jesus in a no-win scenario. They sent spies to ask questions they created that will either get Jesus into legal trouble or destroy his credibility and ability to lead. They would love to see Jesus arrested. They would love to see him captured, bound, drug away by the governor's thugs. They would love to have Jesus put away where nobody could hear what he says. But arrest is not the only path to victory. It's just as good if Jesus' words sink his ministry. If everyone abandons him by what he says, that's good. That's good enough. In this scripture, we tend to spend all our time on the question that they asked Jesus, but we should also look at the statements of the spies. They begin by saying, "Teacher, we know that you are right in what you say and in what you teach." Essentially, they're saying to Jesus, "You are so impressive. What you say really hits home in our hearts." And they go on to say, "You don't favor anyone. Everyone has the same status with you." The final comment was, "But you teach the way of God in accordance with truth." Meaning, you don't tell us what we want to hear. You tell us the truth. You tell us God's truth, the divine truth that is not polluted in any way. But after blowing all this smoke, they spring the trap. They're basically asking Jesus, "Will you answer this question consistent with all the wonderful things we said about you?" You better. They asked Jesus, "Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" There are all kinds of traps in this question. At this time in history, Rome, the country in power over Judah, cares about two things: pay your taxes and don't be a pain in Rome's backside. In a few years, they're going to add the divinity of Caesar to that, but that's not in this day. Those two were the only two that matter. And any comment or action that even potentially messes with Rome's ability to collect taxes is going to be met with force. So, if Jesus says any version of "it isn't lawful to pay taxes," he gets arrested. The second danger in this question has to do with the will of the people. Now, everybody hates taxes. Even the most reasonable people in our day probably admit, "I don't like paying taxes," even if they believe what they're for. But in Jesus' day, it was a lot worse. They were very, very poor. These taxes were crippling, and they were demanded under military threat. If Jesus says it's okay or not even against the law to pay taxes, the will of the people will be against him, and his ministry essentially will be over. And the third thing that matters in terms of this question is the people's prior experience with alleged messiahs. In Jesus' day, there were many that proclaimed in Judah that they were the one that Judah was waiting on. They were the Messiah. All these alleged messiahs flamed out. Over time, they all proved they weren't who they claimed to be. Many of them pressed a super spiritual theology. They'd say things like, focus on the spiritual side. Don't care about the physical side of life. Only the spiritual side matters. You know, it's really hard to hear when you're just struggling to get by. If the spies working for the chief priests and scribes could get Jesus to say something like this, it would severely limit his ministry. The chief priests and the scribes think no matter how Jesus answers this question, he will either get arrested as a revolutionary or he will expose himself as a bankrupt prophet that no one is interested in following. But as he often does, Jesus turns everything upside down with how he engages his interrogators and how he answers the question. He answers the question. He answers the question honestly. He answers it truthfully, but he doesn't answer it the way they expect. First, he demonstrates the hypocrisy of the spies. Show me a denarius, Jesus said. Now, this is a particular coin. It's a Roman coin. Jesus asked whose head and whose title was on it. On this particular coin was an image of Tiberius Caesar, the current emperor of Rome at that time. And Jewish law prohibited images like this on coins. If these were the honest Jewish men that they were trying to appear that they would never carry this coin. But it isn't only the head or the origin of the coin that is the problem. It is also the inscription. At the time of Jesus, the engraving on this coin under the face of Tiberius Caesar said, Son of God. Now I want to take a sidebar here for just a moment. Every time we hear Jesus or one of the apostles or one of the biblical writers claim that Jesus is the Son of God, we need to hear this consistently with how the early church heard this. We need to hear that this is an affront to Rome and all other kingdoms that try to take our focus off of God or try to ruin our trust or make us fear them. The origin, the image, and the title of this coin were all things that should lead this to never being in the hand or the pocket of a respectable Jewish person. It is at this point that Jesus returns to the question that got this going. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Based on his head, based on this inscription, even maybe based on who this coin was printed by, Jesus asks them, where is your hope? Where is your trust? And he responds by saying, give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. How easy it is to get these two things confused, even in our day. It's incredibly easy to think that the power of the empire is what protects us. Why are these spies carrying this coin? We don't know, but there is some advantage that they're going for in carrying this coin. It might hold its value better than Jewish coins. It might be more accepted in trade than Jewish coins. We don't know. But what we do know is there is some reason that they're willing to ignore their laws and carry this coin. And Jesus, in his response, is trying to remind them of where their hope comes from. Even as powerful as the Roman Empire is, it is significantly restrained in what it can offer. Their power seems like it offers all these things, but it actually doesn't. At the time we are holding this service, we are a couple of days away from one of the most contentious elections in the history of our country. Those of you that are joining us on television, you already know how this election has played out. But whether you know or whether you don't, all of us need to ask what God is calling us to give to our nation and what God is calling us to give to Him. And there are two places we need to look at that indicate our hope and trust isn't in the right place. The first of those would be to look at our fear. If there's anything about this election that is drumming up fear in you, and I want you to know, I have fear about this election, so I need this advice too. If there is any fear, you are giving something to Rome that is supposed to go to God. If you're afraid about what might happen if your person doesn't win, you are holding on to the wrong coin. I'm not saying it's all going to be okay. There could be huge consequences because of this election. What I'm saying is, where our trust is, no matter what the outcome, that indicates where our hope is. Jesus is where our hope should be. And the second thing we need to look at is to see if we're giving the emperor his things and God his. Is how we feel about if our person wins. Now, there could still be some fears if our person wins. I'm not talking about that. Here, I'm talking about our sense of relief or hope that comes from our candidate winning. In that case, our hope is also placed in the wrong thing. Every time we hear Jesus labeled as the Son of God, we need to hear what the early church heard. They heard a clash of empires, God's kingdom offering transformation and care. He's offering to transform us from hope in things that cannot deliver what we really need and place our hope on what can never really fail. If you're like me, and my guess is that most of us are in the same place, our fear and our hope both indicate where we have some work to do. Pulling away from trusting in what cannot protect us and placing our hope in the only one that can. What needs to go to the emperors in our lives? What needs to go in God? As we cast our ballot on Tuesday, as we watch the election results on Tuesday night, and maybe even far into the week, ask yourself, what does this reveal about where I'm placing my hope? Is it in a party, or a person, or even a nation? What are the things that we are giving to any other empire than what we should be giving to God? That's what the hope in Jesus has for us. As I said earlier,